What's up, guys? Today's episode is sponsored by Turn the Page Editing. Whether you are looking for an editor or a writer, they will help you with your latest endeavor as beautiful and well-written as possible. Turn the Page offers a number of services that include general editing and proofing, copywriting and editing, and manuscript editing and proofing, which I can speak personally is a lifesaver. Visit turnthepageediting.com to get started. Remember to put too many words in the subject line. Today's episode is also sponsored by LuLaRoe. LuLaRoe is a clothing company that provides comfortable, fashionable, and unique clothing for everyone. The famous soft, buttery leggings are only the beginning. LuLaRoe also has an amazing line of women's dresses, skirts, tunics, and t-shirts. You will get 20% off your next order when you put too many words in the subject line. Go to facebook.com/group/LuLaRoe Rebecca Clark VIP. All right, let's do the show. What's up, everybody? I am Jamie Bedingfield. You are listening to my podcast, Too Many Words. Thanks for tuning in. How's it going? What's new? What are you up to? I'm doing all right. I'm chugging through it. I have an awesome show for you today. I had the privilege of talking to one of my favorite science fiction authors, Charlie Stross. And if you're not familiar with his work, definitely go check it out. I just finished his most recent release, Empire Games, and as to be expected, it was amazing. So pick it up, check him out. It was great talking to him, and I'm going to get to that conversation in just a second. I just want to remind all you wonderful people that after this episode, the show is going on a brief hiatus. I am losing myself in a rewrite, world building, all that stuff. And I've been working on it so far, here and there, but with the show going on a break, I will be putting 120% of my brain into the project, getting through it. I'm actually really excited. I know what to do, and like I said, I started doing it, and I have the music to help me, and just having fun, heads down, all that stuff, and dates for when the show will come back. I will post them when I know them. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I will post those dates on the Facebook page and on the Twitter. So yes, and that is pretty much all I have to say, all I have to ramble about. Let's go to my talk with Charlie. Hey Charlie, how's it going?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you? Thanks for inviting me to be on the podcast, by the way.
Oh, well, thanks for accepting the invite. I've been looking forward to talking to you. I've been a fan of your words for quite some time. So it's a treat, really. One thing that always, anytime I pick up one of your books, I'm always just thrilled with the beginning because you manage to establish setting and character in just a way that I'm in the story, but I'm not bogged down, and it's awesome.
That's something I actually set out to do very, very deliberately. There's a received wisdom in publishing these days that readers have shorter attention spans than ever before. If you don't hook them straight off the block, a lot of readers will give up before they even get one page in. And to the extent that that's right, I figure if you can get somebody's attention in the very first sentence, you can usually hold them for that page and maybe the next page after that. But it is very important to establish immediately that there's something of interest to be reading. It can be a bit onerous at times. There's a lot to be said for a slow burn start. Many of the classics of the field have a very slow start. For example, take The Lord of the Rings as an opening. But unfortunately, this is the climate we work in. This is what the publishers expect. So I try and go with that. And I'm always in a search to get the best opening line yet.
As a writer, beginnings are really hard for me. And I find one thing that I learned from myself is that I naturally, even if I think differently, I have started at the first plot point. So come the first editing pass, I still have to write the beginning of the book.
Oh, yeah. There's there's a very common tendency among beginning writers to sort of start writing their great novel, write the first chapter, then go back and write it again, and then see what they did wrong, and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. Most of the time, they never get beyond that very first chapter because they're aiming for perfection. Whereas, in reality, the first chapter is something you should probably write after you finished the book. It's just a launch pad. You won't have a fully developed vision of your own characters or setting until you've actually finished the development. So the time to do the rewrite on the first chapter is when you've actually finished the last chapter.
Yeah, well, and it is. It's difficult to know how to begin it until you truly know how it's going to end. And that usually happens once you've ended it, at least for me.
Yeah, and this is also very true for a standalone book. It's much less so for a series work. For example, Empire Games, on the one hand, is the first volume of a trilogy. On the other hand, the trilogy exists in an existing setting, the same setting as my Merchant Princes series. So there's actually about 650,000 words of fiction before it, about a novella's worth more than War and Peace, or 1 2/3 Lord of the Rings. So I had a very, very good idea of what the setting was, and even where most of the characters come in and where they're going before I even started.
I was actually wondering that because I just started reading Empire Games, and I was wondering how that was, tapping into a world that already exists.
One of the problems of tapping into a world that already exists is if there's so much background texture and context, it can be very hard to give a new reader a leg up and get them into it. Now, again, with series works, one of the things publishers have gotten very wary of in recent years is that sales usually fall off from book to book because somebody picks up book 1 and reads it. They maybe follow it with book 2 or book 3. By the time you come to a new book on the shelf, though, which you haven't read any of before, if there's 5 books queued up behind it, quite often the new reader won't bother. So publishers always like series entry points, as they put it, where there's a new beginning in the series midway through it to get new readers on board.
Interesting.
Part of the idea of Empire Games was that it would be a new series entry point, as well as picking up an existing story a generation later. I make no bones about it. The original working title on the book proposal was Merchant Princes of the Next Generation. And to some extent, it does what it says on the tin there. The problem, though, is the Merchant Princes was a very complex series about a loosely connected group of families who have an ability that allows them to travel between parallel universes where history has taken divergent courses, and about the problems and challenges they face. And by the time I'd got through 6 regular length novels or 3 really, really, really big fat books on the 600-page doorsteps about these people, that's a lot of background to absorb. And if you then layer on top another 17 years of context, which is what comes up between the end of the last book in the first series and the opening of Empire Games, that can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah, well, also, that's just, for you, that is just so many details to manage. That's intense.
Oh yeah, managing the detail is a nightmare. It doesn't help, but by the time you're working on a series with that many books already in print, you're juggling about 1 million words of material, and by the time you've written 1 million words of material, you're suffering from middle-aged brain and short-term memory issues. And to add to the job, this is only one of the 2 series I've got that's at that sort of length now. The book I've just handed in the copy edits on and will be tackling the page proofs in a couple of weeks, The Delirium Brief, is the 8th Laundry Files novel and pushes it past the 1 million word mark. And my brain just can't easily task switch between 2 series of such size.
Yeah, well, and you need to make sure that all the details are cohesive, but you also want to give, new, elements to it. So you're not, pulling the same stuff up again. I can't imagine. I was pondering about that this morning. The draft that I'm rereading of a project of mine, it has a lot of details and world building, and it's like, well, I keep having to go back, and I'm like making all these notes, and my notebooks look like, an insane person lives inside them.
Yeah, that's familiar-ish. I am mostly a pantser rather than a planner, in that I do things with the seat of my pants and then regret it afterwards forevermore. No, don't ask me about how in the second Merchant Prince's book I managed to I wrote a villain in without naming him, not actually having this particular person in mind. Then by the time I realized what I'd done, I was partway into book 3 and said, whoops, to my editor, I really need to change this thing in book 2. And he said, tough, it's gone to the printer. So I was stuck with a silhouette sketch of a villain in book 2 of a series, and there was only one possible person that villain could be in the real universe, and that was Dick Cheney. And to this day, I occasionally get emails saying, why do you hate America? All because, unfortunately, the book had gone to production before I realized what I'd done and had a chance to back out of it.
Oh, man.
Well, I don't really mind those cavity searches every time I enter the US anyway.
Well, and so congratulations, because Empire Games was just released yesterday, I believe, right?
Yep, it came out yesterday in the United States. Comes out next Thursday in the United Kingdom and the EU.
That's awesome. Are you doing any touring for it or anything like that?
No touring as such. Lots of blogging, lots of signings around here. Touring is actually pretty expensive and not hugely productive as a rule. But I will be doing an author event in Boston and appearing at the local SF convention Boscone in Boston in mid-February. I'm doing another SF convention in the UK, DurhamCon, later this month. And I'm around and about in the UK and doing a lot of stuff online. Nice.
I mean, that is the great thing about what the internet does bring us. I mean, my show wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for it. I couldn't very well, fly you out here to have a chat. So,
well, yeah, the internet really has made a huge difference for ordinary authors as opposed to the big name in lights stars who get the full marketing treatment and get shipped around to see people. Most of us can't actually justify that in terms of sales. The book business is relatively marginal in terms of profitability. It's not like movies or TV. For budgets, well, take a TV show and strip 3 digits off the end of the price tag, and you're looking at the turnover for a book. The flip side of this is there's a lot more books and a lot more authors out there. And at least the internet allows us to find our fans and our fans to find us and develop a relationship and find out what people like. And also, it gives people an opportunity to yell at their authors about things they've done wrong.
Well, so you've been at this for a while now. I've only been at this full time for about 3 years. And even just those 3 years, I can look back to the very beginning when I went full time and told myself, I just see things so differently. And it's funny how, time passes and you learn more and perspective changes. Is there like things that you look back on that you're like, man, that would have, I was overreacted there, or I was right, it really is super challenging, or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I've been a full-time freelance writer since 2000 and switched to writing novels full-time in 2005. Before then, I had a sideline in computer journalism as well. And things have changed visibly during that time. We're actually going through a major format shift in publishing, especially in the United States right now, the type of which happens once in a generation, if that. My old editor, David Hartwell, was pretty keen on this. Back in the 1950s, for example, the pulp magazines as a market dried up and died at about 2 years flat. But at the same time, the paperback publishing business took up the slack and mushroomed rapidly. Authors who were still trying to make a living selling to the pulps got into horrible trouble. But at the same time, if they were willing to write books or book-length material, you saw the rise of the slim paperback. Then over the next generation, I guess, through to the late 80s, you see the rise of the mass-market paperback, the wire racks in the grocery stores. But then Walmart forced a huge consolidation in the wholesalers who supplied books to the grocery stores in the early 1990s, and the wire rack business died. This, however, coincided with the arrival of the big box bookstores like Barnes & Noble and Borders, and these guys made their money selling hardcovers. And, you don't have to sell that many hardcovers to make up for a huge loss in sales of paperbacks because they make a huge amount more profit. But what happened starting in 2008 It's very easy to forget now that as late as 2008, 2009, ebooks made up about 2 to 3% of book sales total. These days, about 70 to 80% of my sales are in ebook form, electronically, and this has put huge changes in the way that books are delivered, the way books are produced, the way we sell them as well, and the way we deal with our readers. It has made it possible for authors to self-publish with varying degrees of success, depending to some extent on how professional the authors are and how much recognition they have of the amount of work that goes into taking a manuscript they've written and turning it into a book people want to read. At the same time, we're seeing signs of major publishers are now beginning to adapt to the new world realities and are beginning to look at ebooks as being the new cheap disposable reading matter, the new mass market, basically. And just staying on top of your game during this sort of change is quite a challenge, because writing is a long-term business. We know what we're doing years in advance if you've got book contracts, and to suddenly be sandbagged by an entire industry dying is really quite shocking.
Yeah.
Not only do people have ebook readers like Kindles or Nooks these days, a smartphone with a 5.5-inch screen is a pretty good ebook reader. And these days, I don't go out of a house without a phone with the Kindle app on it and access to a bookshelf with enough reading matter to keep me going for years already installed on it.
Yeah, same here. I had a Kindle Paperwhite a long time ago, but my go-to e-reader is my phone, and it makes waiting in the line at the grocery store just quite delightful.
It also means that if you finish a book you're reading while you're doing something else, then unless you're actually stuck on a flight with no in-flight Wi-Fi, you can pull in something new on the spur, on impulse. I mean, the ability to actually shop on impulse for a book wherever you are, whenever you want, is really, really, really bad for your bank account.
It is. Well, and I'm not the best sleeper, so like I will be up at 2:00 in the morning trying not to think about everything that I did wrong in this one scene, and I'll end up just buying a book. Yeah.
Yeah, my to-read shelf actually grows faster than I read through it, and I read upwards of 100 books a year, so that's actually quite worrying.
I am in the same boat because, yeah, I hit right around that number as well, and I am adding books to my list more than I'm taking them off, and I read at a pretty steady clip.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you find it difficult to read prose while writing, or is it, I've heard both where some writers can't do it, some writers have to do it?
Yes and no. What I find I can't do is read anything similar to what I actually write while I'm writing. So I hate to confess it, but too much steampunk and random fantasy in my diet, frankly. Exactly not what you'd expect. I got a lot of very earnest people recommending that I read the latest thing by Ramesnam, or think of someone else who writes fairly hard-edged, technologically oriented SF. And no, I just can't read that sort of thing, especially while I'm writing, while I'm creating. It's too similar.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In particular, I try to avoid stuff that has got a very good reputation but treads too close to my own work. For example, there's the Long Earth series by Stephen Baxter and the now dead Terry Pratchett. Mm-hmm. Everybody says it's actually in some ways not too dissimilar to The Merchant Princes in its premise, but I'm avoiding it like the plague, at least until book number 9 of the third Empire Games book is out, simply because I don't want to risk any cross-contamination. So even though there has been none so far, I think the first Merchant Princes book came out the year before The Long Earth, so...
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, especially while you're creating, the mind is so vulnerable that you have to be careful what you put in it.
Up to a point. I can make up for it with non-fiction reading up to a point, but again, the internet and its easy access to almost clickbaity news, it's not good for one's attention span. I've sort of gradually come to realize I've now got the attention span of a weasel on methamphetamine. It's just no good. Try and concentrate on anything for more than 5 minutes at a stretch.
Yes, it is hard. I mean, well, my mind, like, where I am right now is I'm trying to, I juggle multiple projects in different phases so that when something else needs to be, I need to stop and get away from it so I don't break it, or I need to, I'm waiting to hear back on something else, it helps me because I have to keep working. It's just how I'm wired. So, yeah, but the focus, because I will be working on something and another idea for something else pops up, and it's like, okay, well, I'll quickly write that down in this other notebook so it's out of my head, and then I go back.
Yeah. I generally find it difficult to task switch between book length projects, though, because these days a novel, I have book contracts for sort of specify the length I'm expected to turn in. My editors will yell at me if I hand in less than a 100,000 word draft. Now, you go back to the 1960s, and a typical novel was 60, 70,000 words. These days, the last 3 I've handed in have averaged about 125 to 130,000 words. That's a lot of text. That's sort of 400 pages, and holding all that in your own head, I can't just pick it up and put it down. If I take a long break from it, before I can actually pick up work and continue writing a novel, I have to read through and edit the entire thing from start to finish. And that's actually quite time consuming. If you think how long it takes you to read a 400-page novel, the time it takes to actually read it and redline it and make changes is quite ridiculous. If you put it down for a couple of weeks, you then have to spend another week getting up to speed before you can start adding to it again.
No, I don't juggle book lengths, but I do break up the book monotony with short stories.
Oh, yeah. I've reduced the amount of short fiction I've been writing, but the amount of blogging and guest essays and so forth, it tends to spike with a novel release. I think I've written about 6 or 7 guest editorial essays and op-eds over the past week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's slightly exhausting and has been a bit of a distraction from trying to finish this damn space opera I'm working on. I'm working my way up towards a sword duel on the deck of a burning airship floating in the atmosphere of a Venus-type hell world. And
that sounds amazing.
Got to write another marketing blurb.
Do you listen to music while you write, or do you prefer silence, or sometimes it depends?
I usually need music because, as I think I said, I live in an apartment overlooking a busy main road. And because I'm in a World Heritage site, it's authentic window furniture. We're not allowed double glazing, for example. So it can get a bit noisy at times. So what I need is basically auditory wallpaper, easy listening.
Oh, okay.
Stuff that's not too distracting.
Yeah.
Or stuff that is, if it is distracting, it's stuff that is so over familiar. I've been listening to it for 20 or 30 years, and I know where it's going.
Yeah, I have a lot of songs that my poor family, like I will just put the same song on repeat. If it's making me vibe and think of stuff, then it will be overplayed.
iTunes playlists help.
Yes, they do. It's also nice to I use it as a warm up. It's like, okay, I'm getting ready to get heads down. Let me make a playlist.
Yeah, I occasionally do that, but not with every book. That's something I should do for this one, actually, although I'm most of the way through it. If I keep writing today, I'll probably pass the 130,000 word mark on this draft, and I've got about 1.5 chapters to go to finish it.
Oh, wow. Well, that's exciting.
It'll be out in summer 2018, hopefully.
So you're at the home stretch now.
Close. It's been a long slog on this one, and if I don't finish it in the next week, the first draft, it needs to go on the shelf for a couple of months, then get a rewrite. I've really got to do that because I've got to do another edit on a different book for a deadline in early February.
Oh, wow. Now, are you able to, with all your projects, to take that time and step away from it, or do sometimes your deadlines not allow you to give yourself that break?
Sometimes deadlines don't allow me that break. This one I've got underway early, so I can take a couple of months out and pass it to my agent to kick the tires and do a second pass on it. Others, it really depends on how much time I've allowed for it. Publishers like a predictable treadmill because publishers aren't actually in the business of publishing books individually. They're in the business of running a production line with a set number of titles coming off the end of the rubber belt every month. You're allocated a place in the production line. Everything moves in lockstep, taking typically a year from arrival in production to publication. And you've got to hit those deadlines. you can sometimes take a couple of extra months, but it is inconvenient for the people you're working with. And if you think of an author as being a small business supplying a large multinational with interchangeable commodity with other businesses, you don't have to be late too often to get a reputation for being difficult to work with. And there's always another supplier around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Unless your name is J.K. Rowling, in which case it's publisher's problem.
Yep. Oh, man. World building is just, it is something that I am, not that I'm surprised. I mean, of course, it is something that's challenging. It's something that needs to be done with care, and it's something that's not often right the first time. But what is, some of your challenges as far as you, especially with your more recent book, it's not that far into the future.
Yeah, I began writing Empire Games in early 2013. It was going to be my big fat post-Edward Snowden techno-thriller with parallel universes, and oh dear, it's been run over by the recent US election cycle. I was trying to write a crapsack dystopian surveillance state near future in 2020 in a timeline where the president was murdered in the White House with a stolen American nuclear weapon in 2003, and the DHS has become this hypertrophied, monstrous, bloated bureaucracy trying to protect the nation from all threats from other parallel universes. And if you can't spell bureaucratic mission creep, I don't know how else you spell it. And yet, it's now in danger of being reframed by reality as a happy, utopian, optimistic future. I mean, there's a female Democrat in the White House, not Hillary, it's somebody else. Things are gradually getting a bit better. The paranoia is dying down a little. I mean, I'm going to have to turn up the fear and loathing in book 2 quite considerably before I hand it in. Just to keep up.
Yeah, well, it's such a circus out there that, to take, the future and try to, make it different. I mean, things are just so cartoony.
Yeah, I was sandbagged by this in the next novel I have coming out, the Delirium Brief, the 8th Laundry Files novel, where I had pretty much finished a draft in March last year, and then, I don't know if you've heard about the Brexit referendum result in the UK. The population of the UK narrowly voted in a referendum that should never have been held to leave the European Union, and politics just went bizarre. I basically had to tear up half the novel and rewrite from scratch in 2 months because the plot no longer made sense. I had this nice line in British government bureaucratic satire, and then suddenly life went beyond satire. Well, Tom Lehrer said it best, satire is dead. I think that was that was when Henry Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize. And things have gotten a lot worse since then.
Well, with all the positive things that technology brings us and, making platforms possible and just, research alone. I mean, I've been knee deep in doing research for a project, and it's just, so much simpler now with the internet rather than going through all these texts and trying to figure out exactly what it is you're looking for.
Research and world building is an endless rat hole. You can just vanish down it for hours every day and not get any writing done.
Yeah, I did that. I lost myself in Hindu mythology for 3 days. And
wow.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of rules of thumb, though. One of them I stole from Ken MacLeod because, all writers steal. It's what we do for a living, really. Ken's aphorism is quite simply, the secret weapon of science fiction writers is history. Once you start reading history, you realize that a lot of patterns of human behavior keep recurring. It never occurs the same way twice, but you can see similarities between stuff that happened 70 odd years ago and stuff that's happening now. A lot of people are getting kind of worried about politics in the developed world today and pointing to the 1930s. And yes, but it's not exactly the same. The 1930s are a useful way of making sense of the present, though. And you can turn this on its head and say, right, I'm going to set something in a science fictional secondary world. Let's see how the French Revolution played out, and imagine a world where there were no revolutions in the 18th century, where the revolutionary effect of the Enlightenment didn't happen, and have it break out in the early 21st century. How are things going to develop now? Well, let's look at what happens with the dynamics of a revolution when it hits a autocracy. And that's where one of the timelines in Empire Games gets its dynamic. The world of a new American Commonwealth is one where there was no US War of Independence, there was no French Revolution, the old empires continued. The British Empire basically moved to the North Americas after the invasion of England in 1760 by the French. By 2000, you have a intercontinental superpower face-off between two relatively backwards, underdeveloped, sort of 1940s tech empires. The British Empire, based in Manhattan, well, the capital is New London on Manhattan Island, and the French Empire, the capital St. Petersburg in what we refer to as Russia. Let's just bear in mind that the French have had a thing for trying to conquer Russia for quite a while. The Russians had a thing for adopting French innovations, and some point in the 19th century they merged in this timeline. And when the revolution finally breaks out in what was the British Empire in the 21st century, things are going to play out rather differently from how they did historically in our world in the 18th century, because they didn't have steam engines, much less biplanes back then. Now, you can vanish down the rabbit hole of research on this one for ages, but as I say, that's the application of history. The other rule of thumb I've got several of them. One of them is William Gibson's rule. The future is already here today. It's just unevenly distributed. Whenever you look around you, there's some very, very high-tech stuff just out of sight that you don't see. Similarly, if you're trying to write fiction set 10 years in the future, you need to remember that much of that future is already here today. Many of the buildings are here. Half the cars on the road are already driving around now. 80% of the people are there. The elderly there'll be fewer. The people who are elderly today will not be there, but there'll be new elderlies to replace them who are currently middle-aged. So the face of the future only 10 years hence is actually very, very familiar. 90% of it is entirely familiar. 10% is stuff we can predict reasonably accurately. We can look at roadmaps from semiconductor companies or space companies or pharmaceutical companies and see where things are going. And there's going to be 1% that is totally, who ordered that? Stuff that nobody in their right mind would have predicted from 10 years ago. For example, go back to January 2007. Nobody would have predicted the global financial crisis. Well, correction. Very few people and specialists in the finance sector might have predicted there would be a global financial crisis. They probably wouldn't have had it breaking out within the next 12 months, though. And the idea that it would have led us to where we are today would have been considered a bit bizarre.
Yeah. Well, so how do you manage the research work? Do you give yourself a time limit as far as what you're reading, or are you taking notes while you do it, or is it kind of this simultaneous process that kind of just takes place?
Simultaneous process is it. No working, producing fiction writer has time to sit down and fully research a world and do all the world building before they start work. Rather, what I tend to do is I tend to be thinking about my next novel while I'm working on the current one. And I spend a fair bit of time on the net before I settle down to write each day. And I'm making notes, marinating in what's going on, learning, looking at developments, and tucking stuff away to save for later until it all comes together in another book further down the line. This does have the side effect, but I'm always kind of slightly impatient to finish the book I'm working on now so that I can write the next one in turn. But at least it gives me something to look forward to.
Yeah. So you have these complicated worlds, and then you have characters inside of them. And, the settings are only, and the world building, it'll only take you so far. You need people for readers to root for. Is that a challenging thing to balance inside the world that you're building, or is it are these characters just kind of end up coming out of these environments?
They emerge from the messy debris from a collision. You can start out with an idea for a character, but you need to have some idea of their background, who they are, what the strings are that are attached to them. In Empire Games, for example, we meet the character of Rita, at the very beginning in chapter 1. And along the way, we meet her grandfather, Kurt. We meet her parents and brother. We meet her roommates very briefly. We meet the people she works with and the people she knows. And this is all happening within the context of the world she lives in. Now, I developed that world in turn, as I mentioned, from a world that had been on the receiving end of an act of nuclear terrorism and then a paranoid war on the multiverse, and never mind the war on terror, that has implicitly affected her. It's impinged on her life in a myriad of ways. For example, she lives in a world where there are black prison systems, where there are effectively secret police everywhere. There is a national identity card scheme, a DNA database where you can be swabbed and tested to prove your identity, where there's CCTV on every block in every city in the United States. It's a pretty draconian police state, although I should add, all of these measures are to some extent in force somewhere in the world today already. Rita, being a member of an ethnic minority, she's kind of a bit concerned with this. She wants to keep her head down and her nose clean. And all of this has an impact on her personality and her character and on how she presents in public. So yeah, the background of a setting and the characters are intimately interrelated. And if you take the character out of a setting, they may not make as much sense. But hopefully this comes through reasonably clearly within the story. One of the things I like to do is to use the characters to make the background make sense without having to describe it explicitly.
Okay.
So that you get a feel for her world by how she behaves within it,
right,
rather than by me simply sitting down and saying, this is a police state.
Right. Totally. Well, Charlie, can you tell everybody where they can find you, Twitter, site, that sort of thing?
Yep. On Twitter, I am C. Stross. That's Charlie, Sierra, Tango, Romeo, Oscar, Sierra, Sierra. I have a blog. If you look at my Twitter profile, you'll find a link to the blog. Alternatively, if you go to www.accelerando.org, which is conveniently the name of one of my books, which you can find on Amazon, you'll find my blog there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Charlie, for coming on the show. It was very awesome talking to you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And that wraps it up for this week, for a little bit. Thanks for tuning in. And as usual, you can find me on Twitter at @MeBettingfield. Follow the show on Twitter at Too Many Words Pod. Same names on Facebook. And for everything about me, my words, and everything in between, you can go to my site, jamiebettingfield.com. And I will post the dates of the show's return when I have them, when I've rewritten myself into oblivion. So stay tuned for that. Good luck with all your projects if you have them, and stay kind.